It's the Mio on MMA podcast, and just because we don't have any UFC this week doesn't mean that there isn't anything to talk about. I'd opened up the Discord, I'd opened up the Twitter to questions that you wanted to hear me talk about, that you wanted me to answer, that you wanted my personal spin on. And I'm here to give you the answers to let's see here. 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions, 4 questions, 5 questions, 6 questions, 7, 8 questions. Plus, I do want to talk about 2 things that one news item that is kind of making rounds today, and another news item, not really news item, but an upcoming card. And let's start with the upcoming card. So there's no UFC this week. There's no Bellator. There's no PFL this week. Obviously, it's a pretty big deal. It's pretty seldom that we get absolutely nothing for the big shows. No one, no PFL, no Bellator, no KSW or even Cage Warriors. But what we do have this week, is LFA 151. Delano versus Shields, or versus Santos. Pardon me. Coming to you from Sao Paulo, Brazil, of all places, actually. So, a little bit more than a regional promotion, because LFA normally is a regional promotion. Let's see here. If I pull up the LFA events for the year, they do a fair bit of different regional stuff. For example, I didn't know that they did a show in Minnesota, actually. LFA 150 most recently was in Minnesota. There you go. Chandler, Arizona, Commerce, California, Sloan, Iowa. They do a couple of shows in Brazil. This is not new. They did 143 in Brazil, 136, so 132. So say one every 7 events or so will be in Brazil. So it's a little bit more than a regional promotion, which is cool. But it's going to be a good card. Now, those of you, I can't say it's going to be a good card. On paper, there are some fights here that look like they're going to deliver. And for those of you who aren't familiar with LFA is where a lot of the best and brightest prospects for the UFC actually come from. Because if we just look at, say, UFC 263 or 283 that just happened, if I pull up Glover Teixeira here and I go to UFC 283, you had the Bonfim brothers who came from LFA. I want to say Luan Lacerda did as well. Let's see here. Can confirm Ismail Bonfim, Gabriel Bonfim, both from LFA. Lacerda from LFA. One fight in LFA, but LFA nonetheless beat Tyron Pedro. And then a number of others. Like if you go down the UFC's roster and you exclude European talent, because admittedly LFA doesn't book a lot of European talent, but you look at Americans, Brazilians, etc. A lot of them fought in LFA for a portion of their pre-UFC career. So you're looking at the stars potentially of tomorrow in the UFC now for a lower price point. It's on Fight Pass. I don't know if it's on the ESPN app, actually. It'd be interesting. LFA 151. Are you on ESPN Plus? So I'll be watching it on Fight Pass. It's not looking like it's on. No, it is. There you go. It's on ESPN Plus and it's on Fight Pass. So if you watch the UFC on any regular basis, you have one of those subscriptions, if not both. So you can check it out. Seriously. I'm not going to go through a full breakdown of the card, but the main event of Jose Delano versus Gabriel Santos. Santos is an undefeated fighter. It's a little bit of a no-name record, 9-0, but he's a guy who has a hell of a knockout win most recently in LFA, and a couple of decisions, couple of submissions. He does everything. He really is a bright, possible future. You've got the LFA strawweight title fight between Juliana Palastri and Brenda Godig. That's also a pretty interesting fight. Milson Castro, Anderson Fajea on the card. Both more veterans. I don't think either of these guys will be like a long-term UFC investment at any point. Like they're 17 and 20 fights into their career, respectively. So they're going to kind of, they probably have that quadruple A pathway. Julian Erosa would be my closest thoughts on that, because of course Erosa made it to the UFC with a bunch of fights, ended up losing, ended up getting cut, ended up coming back. I could totally see both of these guys having some kind of similar journey to that. And then it, falls off a little bit, not gonna lie, although Mateus Roca versus Jefferson Nascimento, another pair of interesting prospects going head to head that I would like to see do some things. I'm actually a fairly big fan of Lucas Barros, who is 7-2. You could argue is a guy we're not going to see in the UFC at any time. Jungle Fight veteran. But, pretty exciting. Pretty enjoyable fighter. He's in there with someone who I think will give him another interesting fight, and that is Cassio Barao, who I'm less familiar with, but is a freaking unit, to be honest, at 7-0. 5'8", lightweight, and he still looks big. And then going down, you still have a lot. You get to about the end there. Although Gabriel Souza Galindo is another pretty interesting prospect. A lot of interesting prospects on the card. Not the deepest fights in the world, obviously, but it is definitely worth your time. Obviously, don't cancel your plans. If you had plans because it's a non-UFC Saturday to go do stuff with the family, with friends, whatever, don't cancel that. That's life. That's more important than fighting. But if around 8 p.m. Eastern you happen to not really be doing much else, check it out. There you go. All right. So that's my LFA pitch and so on. Social media thing of the week is right now, there's a lot of hate going on for Amanda Nunes because I'm not sure if the UFC started this or fans started this, but there's talk that she's ducking Irene Aldana and Juliana Pena, largely because she did not sign on the dotted line for UFC 285 to be the co-main event for John Jones, Francis Ngannou, because I suspect the UFC realizes that they have only one title fight on the card. Their ESPN contract stipulates they must have a title fight in the main event, and they probably have figured out that right now, right this second, they are relying on John Jones to actually show up and fight for this event to be successful and be within the contract. And knowing John Jones and his misbehavior outside of the octagon, his tendency to try to power play, honestly, the fact that he still hasn't fought at heavyweight, and that's why the automatic title shot to me was always a bad idea. But you're relying on John Jones to keep a title fight on this card. You probably need to get something else on there. The problem here is I have no sympathy for the UFC being unable to convince one of their champions in January to fight in early March. A standard fight camp is about 3 to 4 months. You're asking them to do it in less than 2. We'll call it 2 because they probably they've been trying to get this done since early January. So we'll give them that credit. So we'll say 2 months. And no champion is going to really want to do that unless you're willing to pay the money and make it worth their while. And we know the UFC probably doesn't want to do that because they realize that usually they can try and bully fighters into doing what they want. But of course, Amanda Nunes kind of has one eye towards retirement, kind of is above the whole UFC bully game. And probably that's why she won't fight Aldana or Pena in March. I think if they offered her a fight in, say, June or May, she would probably be down. Probably would be entirely fine with that because here's the thing. This term ducking tends to get thrown around a lot. When it comes to a UFC champion, you're not going to get an easy fight. It's just not going to happen because an easy fighter isn't going to make their way to a title shot. You are going to fight someone difficult. And the thing is, with Pena, Nunes has already shown that she can beat her fighting in a completely different style to what she normally does because she changed stances in the second fight. And in the case of Aldana, aside from being a 5'9" bantamweight, being reasonably long, reasonably large, what exactly are the huge problems there? Because I mean, we are talking about a woman who was losing large chunks of her fight with Macy Chiasson. And if you think Macy Chiasson's physicality gives problems to someone, I don't even know how to describe Amanda Nunes's physicality and how many problems it's going to bring to someone. So, just no. To me, this reads as a standard. UFC has realized they've created a boo-boo by not having another title fight on UFC 285 and relying on John Jones as one half of the only title fight. And they're kind of panicking. And they're kind of trying to find any champion at all that will take that booking and defend their title on pretty damn short notice. Like half camp short notice. So, tough luck. Honestly, tough luck. Right. Let's move on to the questions. So, from Jules, we have seems like a perfect time to break down Francis's release from the UFC. I did verify this was Francis Ngannou. So, let's talk about Francis Ngannou here for a second. He did the MMA Hour. We have some things from his point of view. We have the UFC's sort of official stance. To go over the UFC's official stance in a nutshell, Francis Ngannou was released, and it's because he didn't want to fight high-level competition. He wants to fight lesser competition for more money, to directly quote Dana White. Here's the problem. First off, there is no release in this situation. What the UFC did, I guess that technically could be referred to as a release, is they released their matching rights clause with Francis Ngannou to allow him to not have to worry about the UFC matching any offer he gets. The thing is that they weren't going to do that anyway. They have released nothing because this was not a money question. Because here's the thing. If it's ever a money question, ever a money question, the UFC would not lose. This has come up with fighter pay all the time. Someone once asked me, are you not offended by the fact that Bellator pays very little? Well, no, because Bellator also wasn't profitable until, I believe that I've seen reports that they were estimated profitable in 2019. I don't even know if that's the case. And of course, COVID probably derailed that. We got that from the UFC antitrust lawsuit. We got some Bellator financials. So you can't compare a company that is losing money on pay to a company making billions while paying very, very little. That's why the UFC is the one that gets the crap for the fighter pay. It's the fact that they make up 90+% of American MMA revenue. That is 9 times Bellator, PFL, all the regional promotions combined, and does not pay 9 times as much in general. If you look at the overall payroll, you look at the fighters, there are fighters who have literally gone from fighting in LFA, which I just talked about, to fighting in the UFC and making less. That's the problem. That is the problem with the pay. So the UFC would never be really outbid. So the idea that someone would leave the UFC as a star to go make money elsewhere in MMA is slightly ridiculous. Because why could that logically be the case? And if Francis ends up fighting in MMA, sure, there may be a big payday with PFL, but it probably won't be more than, and he's admitted this, that the offer was probably about comes to about $8 million projected to take the John Jones fight. He will not make more than $8 million outside of the UFC in MMA. That is why this is not about money. Because the money answer purely is to stay in the UFC. The answer is freedom. He wants to box. He said that he was willing to sign a 3-fight contract with the UFC, no matching, no extension provisions. Want to knock that out in a year. That's a little optimistic, I think. Getting 3 title fights in a year at heavyweight, I think that's a little bit optimistic. I think someone is doing some laundry upstairs. Sorry if that noise is coming through. This is the joys of renting a property. um, but what I'm getting at here is that he wanted to sign a 3-fight deal, knock it out, make some good money in a year, and then go box. And the UFC was not cool with that. They would not meet that. They would not meet the healthcare demands, which he put up, which he admitted that he was willing to waive. The problem essentially boils down to Francis wanted concessions. He wanted a negotiation. He wanted healthcare for all fighters. He wanted a fighter advocate involved in the negotiation process. He wanted to be able to have sponsors without the UFC getting a cut. Those who are unaware, the big problem with sponsorship right now is that, number one, because of the Venom deal, originally the Reebok deal, now the Venom deal, the UFC has the uniforms thing, which you cannot put sponsors on. Number two is that any kind of sponsorship that you want to pimp out, that you want to express on UFC programming, the UFC gets a cut. That's the problem, is that this giant pile of sponsorship that back in the day made up thousands of dollars, we're talking 50 grand, we're talking 100 grand, for the fighters per fight, is not there anymore. They get a little bit of cut from the Venom deal, but it doesn't even come any close. He wanted to be able to have his own sponsors. He can't do that. People have also said that, like, what sport can you do that with? Someone said this on Twitter, and I answered it pretty succinctly. I think outside of the NFL, realistically speaking, all the major leagues allow you to have sponsorship deals. Like, yes, you can't come out in the NBA with Condom Depot strapped to your back or whatever. But have you ever looked at the endorsement deals with footwear companies that the NBA athletes make to wear their shoes during the game? That's a major sponsorship deal right there that UFC athletes do not have. Everything that they wear is Venom and UFC branded, and Venom is working through the UFC. So any idea that, like, oh wow, these greedy fighters want to be able to market stuff. They do that in every sport. I think literally the NFL is probably about the only one, because the helmets have to be certified by the NFL, the cleats have to be certified by the NFL, whatever. But like baseball players, baseball bats, gloves, etc. Also, back in the day, chewing tobacco was a huge, big one. Not so much now, but back in the day, big deals for chewing tobacco. Basketball players with their shoes. Let's not even talk about soccer players and the cleats. Oh my lord. Those deals are horrendously ridiculous. So that idea needs to go out of the window. Like, the UFC is one of the few sports leagues that requires fighters to basically waive any sponsorship rights they have in the cage. And that's kind of about it. Like, the UFC was willing to go up in money, but there was no negotiation going on all of these other elements. Now, so there's also an idea that, like, Ngannou overplayed his hand, that this is not going to work out for him, and it might not. It may legitimately not. If a big boxing fight does not come together, this has backfired for him. If he doesn't fight a Fury or a Wilder or an Anthony Joshua and make bank, like we're talking probably north of 20 million, this does not work out. Because there is no MMA promotion that can give him what the UFC was giving him for as long as the UFC was willing to give it to him. Because the UFC, I believe, wanted a 6-fight deal. So 6 fights. I'm assuming the $8 million for the Jon Jones fight probably was specific to the Jon Jones fight, and that the rest would be less. But let's say $5 million for the rest. So that is $25 million for everything after that. $8 million. That's $33 million. He will not make that in MMA without a massive shift in the landscape. Can he cause that shift in landscape, especially with Nate Diaz also being a free agent right now? Jake Paul kind of getting into MMA? Maybe. But it is a huge gamble. So I don't disagree with people who believe that he may have overplayed his hand. That being said, there are some people that think he overplayed his hand just because he wanted like $20 million from the UFC. That appears not to be the case. Because if it was just money, they probably would still be at the table right now. He's been a free agent since December 9th. He hung around and talked with the UFC into January to try to get this deal down. Like, if it was just a money deal, I think it would have happened. This is about something larger to Francis. Whether you, as an MMA fan, care about that, that is up to you. But I would suggest that you should, because these fighters take tremendous amounts of trauma to entertain us and deserve to get what they want, honestly, if they can get it. If they can get it. If there's someone willing to pay it, they should get it. Interesting note that Markel Martin is not his manager anymore. He's looking for a more stable manager. Although he is still talking with Markel Martin. Martin is still an advisor of sorts, but he no longer has that official manager position. That was interesting. Also spoke to Randy Couture about his dealing with the UFC. And that's another thing is like, this is not just a Francis issue. I don't believe, at least in the history of UFC champions having disputes with the UFC, that this is ever about money or ducking someone. The best example of this is Tito Ortiz, because people always go with the Tito Ortiz was ducking Chuck Liddell. I think there's a kernel of truth to that, but the UFC and Tito Ortiz were butting heads over money long before the Chuck Liddell fight was floated. Tito Ortiz was at war with the UFC in the lead up to the Ken Shamrock fight about his pay, because he knew the Ken Shamrock fight was going to be huge, was going to be massive, and that he wasn't going to get his cut of it, essentially. That his deal, while being the biggest star in the UFC, which he was not going to change. And like the other thing is like, all right, he ducked Chuck so hard that he lost his belt to Randy, and then fought Chuck. And then came back to the UFC to fight Chuck again. I am not a huge fan of Tito Ortiz. I think he has a lot of terrible takes and is not the smartest man in the world. But the idea that he was simply afraid of Chuck, and that was the motivating factor, just does not make sense with the timeline and how things went. It does not. For him, it was about money at a time when the UFC probably honestly couldn't really afford to pay it. Yet. Until after the Ultimate Fighter, the gravy train wasn't rolling. But he wanted something. It's not fear, it's want. I'm not saying that fighters don't feel fear. Not saying that they aren't concerned about fighters. But this almost goes back to like the Aldana Pena versus Nunez idea that is being ducked. No, fighters have concerns. They want their best situation. That's what it boils down to. But they do, generally speaking, want to fight the best. That's how they're wired. And every time a fighter is in a contract dispute with the UFC, I am probably going to side with the fighter. Because the UFC makes a ton of money and makes a ton of demands and limits freedom. And yes, the independent contractor thing has to come up here because independent contractors have to sign away certain freedoms usually. I've been an independent contractor with non-compete clause, certain companies I can't work with while I'm working at that company. Obviously, these are things there. For example, I don't even really have a problem with the UFC restricting people to fighting only in the UFC. That actually makes sense. But once we got into like the Venom deal / the Reebok deal and the limitations there and the completely ridiculous code of conduct, that is where like this whole independent contractor thing should have gone and died. Craig asks, he'll pile on the Francis thing by asking, Jones gone, what are your thoughts? He does say that he knows he'll get a full breakdown at some point, but wants a tease. Where should Francis go and why is it KSW to fight Super Pudzianowski? And am I hyped for Gaethje versus Fiziev? So let's start with the first one. Jones versus Gone is a weird one because there's a version of John Jones, a destroyer, a god of combat, that probably goes in here and wins this fight with relative ease. The problem is We haven't seen him fight at all in 3 years, and we have not seen that destroyer since 2013. Real talk here. Real talk. Not since 2013 have we seen John Jones the Killer. And there are so many questions that feature that with John Jones. Also, not for nothing, he's a guy who's always profited off of reach. And this is not me saying, John Jones is all reach, no talent, whatever. No. Being just tall is in itself not necessarily a great thing. Like, if that is legitimately all you have, that's a problem. Jones is a fantastic athlete, but the fact that he has an 84-inch reach at 205 meant that he had 5+ inches on pretty much everyone he ever fought. The only people close were Gustafsson, Stephan Bonner, and OSP. And OSP himself is used to being the big guy. He was kind of unmanned by the fact that John Jones was as big as him. Stephan Bonner is just not very athletic. And Gustafsson, for all of his reach, is not actually really much of an outside fighter. He's very willing to fight he's very willing to fight in the pocket. Very willing to, at his best at mid-range. So any, reach parity really wasn't a huge problem for Jones. So that's the thing. Gon's got a longer reach than any of those guys. And is a way better outside fighter than any of those guys. So if Jones elects to fight like he did against Dom Reyes, Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos, even to a degree Daniel Cormier, which were fights that were very good, but were very much tailored by Cormier's lack of ability to engage him at range, there's a huge opening for Gon to win here. And that's even if this fight actually even happens. And it's one of those fights that I don't really believe that it's going to happen until it happens. As for the Pudzianowski idea, I do not find Francis versus Pudzianowski appealing. I'm not a big freak show guy. I'm just not. Even if we go back to Pride, we go back to the Zulu Zinho and the Giant Silva, Henry Satoru Miller, even guys like Takayama and James Thompson who had a little bit of talent, or Bob Sapp. Not really my cup of tea. So Francis versus Puig is not my cup of tea. But when it comes to MMA, I have just kind of said that there's not really much that I would be super hyped for when it comes to Francis in MMA. The fascination of post-UFC Francis is boxing, kickboxing, not MMA. So, why not? Why not? KSW would do it right. They would put a spectacle around it. They'd probably pay pretty well. It would probably do business for them. Because Puig does business, and Francis is going to do business anywhere he goes. So, hey, why not? But Francis would murder him. And Gaethje versus Fiziev is an exceptionally dope fight. So, I am very hyped for that. I'm not going to break it down, but I am very hyped for that. We'll get to it when it comes. Mariah asks, in the theme of 2023, there is the allegations that Conor McGregor assaulted a woman on a yacht. Your thoughts? I don't really have thoughts on this. So here's the unfortunate nature of this event. Is Conor McGregor is accused of assaulting a woman on his yacht. The woman jumped overboard to get away from it. So fairly heinous assault, if we're being honest. Originally, she said some other guy did it. Now she's saying Conor did it. The problem is that both of these cannot be true. Both versions of her story cannot be true. And this is why I don't subscribe to the believe all women dynamic, because lying and dishonesty does not know gender. That's the truth of the matter. Do I think every allegation should be taken seriously? Absolutely. And I think this one should be taken seriously as well. The only problem is no, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if Conor absolutely was guilty of this. He assaulted a DJ in Italy. He assaulted an old man in a pub. He's been known to do potentially cocaine-induced things. He is a guy who is the poster child for incredibly poor impulse control. So him doing anything does not surprise me. But right now, all we have an accusation. We have nothing to back this up. Let the legal process figure it out. And it's essentially, it's not like the Dana White thing where we have it on tape. It's not like the John Jones thing where John Jones has admitted to what he did vis-a-vis his wife or been charged with various other things in the past. It's not like the Josh Grisby thing, who is in jail for what he did. This is a it's speculation, and so on. Which, I mean, granted, kind of what I apply my trade in, but I know nothing that no one else knows. I just know I know he's accused. I know the story has changed, and that's really all I have to do with that. So there you go. Brock asked, 2 words, power slap. I know exactly why he wants me to answer this question, because I don't really want to talk about power slap. So here is the actual key problem of power slap. I'm not watching it. I'm not going to watch it. So everything I know about power slap is based on MMA media, based on social media, and that is it. Here is my core problem with power slap, which I've articulated before, but let's go into detail. There's no defense, and it is boring. Like, watching DC try to hype it up by saying anything can happen is just blatantly false. Guy is going to get slapped, or girl. They are either going to go down and the contest is over, or they get back up. That's 2 things. That's a binary discussion. That is not anything can happen. There is a boatload of CET that's going to happen here, and the pay, per Eric Spicely, former UFC fighter who was apparently contacted about this, is $2K. Is that worth it? And this is not even me being like, okay, they should pay more. I don't know. Like, this thing did 295,000 views after AEW Dynamite, which had, I had the number written down here, 969,000 viewers on Dynamite, 295 on Power Slap. So about a third. They dropped to like less than a third of the audience. I imagine that this is not a profitable venture. So I'm not gonna really yell or hammer about like that they should pay more. I'm just gonna say that like $2,000 to do this and get guaranteed CTE is not worth it. It's up to the fighter, it's up to the slappers, obviously, whatever. They take this very, very seriously. But seriously, you could not make me do that. I don't feel good watching it. I've watched clips online. That's about it. And like I said, boring. Like, I feel like I would see the first contest and be like, okay, I don't want anything else. Like, when 2 MMA fights happen back to back, and it's the same essential fight, I get bored with that. And at least that's like a very low chance of happening. With Slap League, they're all gonna look largely like each other. Also, on the Eric Spicely note, please, Eric, do not do this. If you happen to come across this podcast, you happen to come across this YouTube video, do not do this. You have been concussed multiple times and knocked out multiple times. You do not need more brain trauma. Please, 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 please don't do it. The bright side is, with the poor viewership and the fact that Dana got caught with the domestic violence incident, this probably won't be around very long. And the last 2 things I'll say. Number 1 is that apparently commissions that will not sanction BKFC, aka bare knuckle boxing, which I am not a big fan of, are willing to sanction this. I have no idea what the deal with that is. Like, as dangerous as bare knuckle seems, it's better than this. It's better than this. And apparently, according to slap experts, people who like follow slapping outside of Dana White's Power Slap, they're not even using the best rules, and they're not even enforcing the rules, apparently. Apparently, some dude knocked someone out by blatantly violating the rules and got in the house. That would be like someone getting into the house on The Ultimate Fighter for like knocking a dude out with soccer kicks. So, like, even within your own structure, you are failing. So, yeah, Power Slap is a joke. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to talk about it again. There you go. Unless maybe someone dies. Jesse asks, Shogun just retired. Give us the career retrospective and who should his final opponent have been? Because, of course, I did say I didn't really like the Ior Pataria fight. Let's start with that. Let's start with the Pataria fight. I didn't really like the Ior Pataria fight because I didn't think it did anything. Like, I picked Shogun to win it, so it had that winner's upside, I guess. But I did that with like rose-tinted glasses, Shogun war pride, like feelings flowing through my body. Stepping back, like it was very easy to see that Pataria could win this fight. And the thing is, I don't see Pataria as a star. I honestly don't. I don't think I think he'll do well because I mean you got the Ukraine sympathy thing. I think any fighter from the Ukraine, except for Askar Mazarov, is in for a bump in stock. But at the same time, I look at his style, I look at his athleticism. He doesn't jump off the page that much in terms of size and physicality. And his fight against Nick Negromariano just it didn't point that this guy is going to be like a big star. It just didn't. There are too many holes in his game that I don't really think at this point he's going to fill. And also he's getting like, a lot of hate. I think rightly so for the whole duelist thing, like the little dance he does. I get in his mind that that's not disrespectful, but I did say it on my review that like is a duel not often about disrespect? Like realistically speaking. I don't maybe in professional dueling parlance there's a lot of respect, but I don't think a lot of people are deep into that. Like, that's the thing is like dueling used to be a way of settling offenses. You have offended me, sir. I demand satisfaction. That's not very respectful to begin with. So like the idea that like him not shooting in his dance, Shogun made it respectful. Is just a no. So you have to deal with that part too. Like no shine gets transferred off him. He just comes off as disrespectful. And he's not that good. So I would have done, like, if you're going to do the young lion, try to build someone, you put him in there with someone like Carlos Ulberg, who has like a lot of potential to grow, like very young in his career, learning, looking better every time out. You let him go out there and you let him beat Shogun and you do it that way. Or you sign a veteran. Lyoto Machida would have been my pick. Double retirement fight. That's cool. I know the UFC is not like going to do it. The UFC was never going to do that, but like in a perfect world, the UFC should have done that. Or you just give him a complete tomato can off the Contender Series because some of the 205ers that they have been bringing into Contender Series are quite bad. Just put two of them against each other. Winner fight Shogun. There you go. That's the three pathways I see. They took the fourth pathway, which is guy who was probably going to beat him, but guy who would get nothing from it. There you go. As for the Shogun retrospective, I mean, Shogun is amazing. Guys, like, if you have not gone back and watched 2005, the run to the GP final, beating Rampage Jackson, Little Nog, Alistair Overeem, Ricardo Arona over a very, very short period of time. That was peak MMA. No one has ever had a year like that, in my opinion. That was amazing. The soccer kicks, the stomps. He was Pride. Watch a Shogun career run of Pride, and it's great. And even the UFC, obviously, the debut in 07, losing to Forrest Griffin, terrible. 09, he beats Mark Coleman, looks terrible. Looks like he's honestly done. Like, if you had told me that he was never going to fight after that fight, I would have believed you. And then the UFC tried to feed him to Chuck Liddell, and he knocked Chuck out. He was not going to be Chuck's rehabilitation. And then he won the belt. He won the belt against Lyoto Machida. The first fight he should have won already. Second fight, he goes out there and just says, I'm just going to do Shogun stuff and knock you right out. That journey, the comeback. Fantastic. Loses to John Jones. Looks like he's done again by about 2013, particularly the Chael Sonnen loss looks pretty bad. Losing to Dan Henderson twice. Losing to Gus, not really a problem. Burning Brandon Vera, I guess, like still meant something at the time, but it looked like he was done. Ended up having like this random third act where he beat Corey Anderson and he beat Tyson Pedro and then faded out. Probably honestly should have retired after the trilogy fight with Little Nog. That should have been a double retirement fight. Basically what I think him and Lyoto Machida this time should have been. But no, like Shogun is an amazing fighter. If you have not gone back and watched the full extent of his career, please do it. It's amazing. It is so good. There is not a boring fight on there, except during some of the sad periods. And I think honestly, even the sad periods make you appreciate the high notes that much more. Shogun Rua, amazing fighter. All right. Given the social media war, this is from Sonia. Given the social media war in regards to MMA corners and the towels, this would be a hot topic to dive into. I was gonna do this topic whether someone asked me or not, because in the wake of UFC 283, the corner throwing the towel in, for the Glover Teixeira and Lauren Murphy fights is just up in the air, and there are so many takes that I want to bat them down so much. Let's get one thing straight. Anytime someone tries to defend a corner not throwing a towel in by bringing up what the fighter wants, can get right out. Because here's the thing. What is the towel supposed to do if it's just an extension of fighter will? A fighter can give up at any time. A fighter can tap out to a submission. A fighter can verbally give up. A fighter can tap to strikes, can tap to exhaustion, can tap to position, can just give up. That is always in the cards. The towel is not about the fighter quitting. It is about the corner protecting them from themselves when the referee and the doctor and their own body are not able to do it. When they are too tough to be knocked out, when they are too game that the referee can't quite step in, and when they are not damaged enough to be to have the doctor come in and stop the fight. That is what the towel is supposed to do. Can we agree on that? Okay. When the corner should throw the towel in, okay, this is a moment of contention. This is the thing. People are saying, in the case of Lauren Murphy, because I believe Lauren Murphy should have the towel thrown in. I'm 50-50 on Glover. I believe Lauren Murphy should have the towel thrown in. The reason is, yes, she wasn't seriously damaged. It was very much, she's apparently quite fine. But here's the thing. We don't know that. Like that is hindsight makes a right versus any kind of, at the moment, knowledge. Because you do not have a brain scan of the fighter as you're cornering them. You do not have and also, let's be honest here, CT has been incredibly hard to actually even diagnose outside of in dead brains. So let's not pretend like this probably didn't shorten Murphy's lifespan. 2, and the more important part, Murphy had no pathway to victory. The corner had no pathway for her to win. Listen to the corner. We're talking about body language. We're talking about we believe in you, Lauren Murphy. We're talking about you need to go for takedowns, which she's been going for takedowns and she can't even get close to them. There was no corner advice suggesting how to win this fight. None whatsoever. Andrade is an amazingly tough person, so much physically above her. You're not going to tap her because Murphy isn't even a great submission artist, not a great finisher in any regard, not a big puncher. Andrade has got a massive chin. I don't mean that in size. I mean that in like the cement that makes it. She was not able to hurt her, not able to take her down, not able to find even moments of success. There is not a phase of 5 seconds in that 15 minutes of action where Murphy was winning the fight. I don't even mean overall. I mean, there isn't 5 seconds she won. She was getting hit roughly every 4 seconds at one point in that fight. There was no pathway to victory. This idea, and this is the kicker for me, is that Lauren Murphy has tweeted in the past on social media, on Twitter, that the fighter is to be protected by the corner. She has said that about other fighters. She just can't see it for herself. And she's going hard after some like mainstream, some reasonably mainstream members of the MMA media, and also kind of well-known fan accounts about this. And I think it's ridiculous. I'm not blaming her for it. The level of detachment from reality, the unbelievable self-belief that is required for someone to get into the cage with Lauren Murphy's physical talents against Andrade or against Valentina Shevchenko is kind of obvious, right? Like, I understand that she believes this, but fans as a whole, the culture of MMA around the towel toss needs to change. Should Glover have had the towel thrown in, I wouldn't have hated it. John Hackleman wanted to stop the fight. He was overruled by the head corner. The difference is that Glover Teixeira has a proven track record of actually finishing people, not just taking beatings to decision. And Jamal Hill has a proven track record of making bad decisions on the ground. So the idea was if Glover could get the takedown, which he did in the 5th round, which admittedly is hindsight, but if he could get the takedown, if he got to the ground, he'd get dominant position and get a finish. So there was a path to victory there. So, but even then, I would not have hated the towel being thrown in. And I picked Glover. So this isn't about like I picked Andrade and wanted a stoppage or something. No. She was just murdering her. And the towel should be used more often. The justifications for it being not used are have no place. Like I guess in a nutshell, have no place. Because they often go to fighter doesn't want towel thrown in. Too bad. That's not your call. Doug asks, actual question. Jamal Hill, is he good? He's definitely good. I still don't know how good. Because the thing about him is Glover Teixeira did look old in their fight. He did look slow. He didn't look like an elite fighter. But Hill still showed levels of takedown defense that we had not seen before. I wouldn't say he showed good grappling, but he showed better grappling and better decision-making specifically than he has before. Well on the ground. Did not get submitted against one of the most dangerous grapplers in his division. Didn't even end up in particularly big trouble. Showed off diversity in his striking game, creativity, good job of keeping range, not getting sucked into where Glover wanted to fight. So his fight IQ looked on point, and his abilities, that was the best version of Jamal Hill we've ever seen. 31 years old. I don't think he's even done getting improving. So he is very good, obvious physical talent. I don't know if he's going to be a long-term champion, because I do want to see him against somebody who's well put together with similar levels of athleticism, because if I were to pull up his record, because I didn't make note of this because I am silly. I read these questions beforehand and I have notes, but I did not think to look this up. But aside from Johnny Walker, I'm correct on that. Aside from Johnny Walker, he has not faced anyone with a similar tier of athleticism. OSP at one point probably did, but 2020 OSP, 37 years old OSP, probably not. Jimmy Crute, no. Physical force, but like it's a very specific physical force. And Thiago Santos, again, probably would have been at some point, but not 38-year-old. 39-year-old, actually. 39-year-old Thiago Santos. The answer on that is no. So there's still a lot of questions about it. I really want to see him fight Yuri Prohaska. I really, really do. And this doesn't change the fact that I still think that like his takes on domestic violence and his outlook on life in general aren't still fairly despicable. But at the same time, like in the cage, dude is super fun and super interesting. And that fight with Yuri, oh, it has me so amped. I don't even want him to defend the title before then because I don't want to risk it. Because nothing else excites me as much as that fight in 205 right now. Because no, Magomed Ankalaev getting a title shot, or Jan Blachowicz, or Anthony Smith, or Alexander Rakic when he comes back has anywhere near the appeal that fight has. Boy, I want him to sit out and wait for that fight, wait for Yuri to recover. And Yuri apparently is making some very rapid recoveries. But yeah, I don't know if that necessarily answers the question of like how good well, no, you asked is he good? He is good. He is good. He is very very good. And the final question from Gidget: will the UFC ever build an atomweight division? I have to ask because we are seeing the end of 145, and my faith that 105 would be a thing has really dropped. Gidget actually is like an atomweight wrestler in university, so I don't know. I don't know if she's pondering an MMA career, but obviously the existence of an atomweight division in the UFC would be a big part of that. I'm in the same boat. There was a point, there was a time when I thought a UFC creating an atomweight division was a given. It's another belt. It's another prop for them to promote fights. It's a relatively exciting division. Like honestly, if you go watch Invicta or you watch the Japanese circuit in terms of atomweight action, it's very, very good. It's very, very good. Some of the best fights in Rise and some of the best fights in Invicta are at atomweight. So I don't see why they wouldn't. There are some very marketable atomweights in the world, but they haven't yet. And they seem to be giving up at 145 if Aspen Ladd, Chelsea Chandler, or not Chelsea Chandler. Yeah, Chelsea Chandler. Norma Dumont are to be believed. Macy Chiasson are to be believed because they have all been told that 145 is not an option for them, that they have to fight at 135 if they want to fight in the UFC, and that's part of why Aspen Ladd ended up leaving. It's which, and I kind of get it. Like featherweight has been a failed division, but they really didn't try. They didn't like this. Kind of is the whole. The UFC is really lazy about stuff like this, where they just don't really try to make this work. Like they signed a couple of warm bodies, tried them out, had them beat by Amanda Nunes, basically, and Holly Holm and Jermaine Durandamine, and then they gave up on the division. Really, they stopped signing people, more or less, outside of Daniel Wolf, and we're in the state where we are now, where it's never been a division. And it's not that there's not enough bodies. Don't get me wrong. There's not a lot of interesting featherweights outside the UFC. I brought this up at nauseum every time we talk about like Kayla Harrison and like legacy and how like the whole thing is like, well, she has to go to the UFC to get a legacy. No, not really. Why? There's nothing there. There's nothing there globally, but there's nothing there in the UFC either. And like the Cyborg fight, like it's basically Cyborg in Bellator and Nunes in the UFC. Like those are the two fights on par for her, and they more or less have given up on the division. I don't know. Do they go and do an atomweight division? I feel like it would be easier to make it work. If I may broach a subject that people don't really like to broach, and I really wish it wasn't a fact, but the atomweight division has a lot cuter girls for the simp UFC fandom, the please mistress sip on my testicles, Valentina Shevchenko fans, sort of group. There's a lot that would be a lot easier to promote, and the fights would be better. I think they should absolutely try it. I don't have any faith that they will, because outside of doing strawweight, outside of doing women's strawweight, they seemingly need a star. And the problem is that how do you become a star outside of the UFC right now? Very, very hard. Very, very hard. And like the last person to really do it, honestly, was Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey made opened the door for women in the UFC by being as popular as she was. So atomweight kind of needs the Ronda Rousey. Hopefully not with the emotional baggage that Ronda has, which is kind of ruining her pro wrestling career. But yeah, there you go. I'm not sure that's the answer you wanted. I still think it's a possibility, but the chances are going lower. I would really like to see it. I think it's a very, very, very good idea. Because for one thing, there are a couple of strawweights that they have that are very good that are really actually atomweights. Looking at Tabitha Ricci, Tisha Torres for the longest time was the example. Luma Lubumli is another example. Like girls who would be fantastic at atomweight. Fantastic. So that wraps us up for this Q&A. To the left, to the right, below, above, I don't know. It depends on where you're watching. You will find a Linktree link to where you can find this podcast, where you can find my social media, and where you can find my Discord. Please check out the Discord. We're doing a Pride-style open weight GP, both for the ladies and for the men, on the Discord this weekend because there's no UFC. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to add on top of that. Have a lovely day. Check out LFA. Enjoy your UFC last weekend. And I'm out.